Hello and welcome to this course. In this course, I will show you how to build a complete weather app using the Open Weather Map API. In this our application, we will be able to get current weather data as well as weather forecast. Our API calls to the Open Weather Map API will be made by city name. So we're going to retrieve the data to display data like temperature, pressure, wind speed, humidity, and other data. So together we'll use this Open Weather Map API. And as the saying goes, an investment in knowledge pays the best interest. You have taken out time to invest in your knowledge, and I believe in the long run you are going to get the best interest out of it. So I will implore you, no matter how difficult it's going to be, to go through the course to the end, so that at the end of the course you'll be able to build a complete weather app using the Open Weather Map API. And also from this you can move on to trying out other web APIs in building web applications. So in the next video we go straight into building our application. Hello and welcome. In this video I just want to talk briefly about the pages we're going to be adding in our weather app. Since we are building a simple weather app, our application is basically going to consist of just 3 pages. That is the index page, the page where we're going to get the current weather information, and also a page where we can get weather forecast. So in our app, basically our app consists of 3 pages. The first page is the index page. So on this page we're just going to have just tests and links. On the navbar on this page we're going to link to the page to get the current weather information, and also a link to take us to the page where we can get the weather forecast. Also the other page, as I said, is the page with form to get the current weather information, and on this page as well we are going to display the result. The last page is also the page to get the weather forecast. As well on this we are going to display the information. So if we go, this is how the index page will look like. So here on this we are going to have the title and a logo. Then on this part we are going to have links. Link to take us to the current page for weather information. Then a link to take us to the page to give us the weather forecast. And then we'll also add a link that will take us to the Open Weather Map page where we can get the API and read about the information on the page. Then here we'll just have a test that we're going to animate using a plugin. Here as well we'll just put some tests. Yes, also we're having some columns with tests, and we have the footer. So this is just a simple index.html page we're going to create. Then also the current.html, as we're going to call it. Here we're just going to input the name of the city, because we're going to be making our search based on city. So we'll put the name of the city and the results will be displayed here. Then also for the forecast, here we might do this a little bit differently, though we are going to search the weather forecast by city, but also the user will have the option to add the number of days by which they want to get the weather forecast. So we're going to add input form here where they can just input the number of days. Maybe they want to get the weather forecast, maybe for temperature for 5 days. They could just add the name of the city as well as the number of days. So this is how our pages are going to be structured. So we'll have the index.html, the current.html, as well as the forecast.html. So on your own you can design the pages the way you want, but this is how I'm going to do it in this tutorial series. Hello and welcome back. In this video we are going to create our project, then we'll open with our text editor. So in this case we are only using HTML and jQuery. So you could just create a folder, place it on your desktop, or place it on whichever folder you prefer. Then you open with your text editor. So for me, I'm going to go inside my documents, then create a new folder. I call it weather app. Then the next thing I'll do is I'll open with bracket text editor, because I'm going to be using bracket text editor. You can decide to use Notepad++ or any text editor you prefer. So I right click on it and open the project using brackets. So when this is opened, we can now create the file starting with the index.html. So for me here, I'll create my index.html. Index.html. Because as I said earlier, we're only using HTML and jQuery. We are not using any server to store any data. We are only going to retrieve the data from the API we're using and display the results. So now I have the index.html. I can open this with this by clicking on this icon. If I click on this live preview icon, it will open this index.html on another page or another browser. But if you are not using brackets, you're just using a text editor, you could go to the folder where you have this file, then click on it to open on your browser. So for me, I'll just add the HTML code here. For the title, I'll change this to weather app, or you can give it whatever name you want. So I have this weather app, so I click on this. It's going to open this in a new tab. Click on it, wait for it to load. Yeah, we have the index.html. So if I add a text to it so that we can see, we go back to it. Now we can see that we have this text. So we don't have any CSS for this. So we can see that we already have this opened. Now the next thing we're going to do is right now is we're going to add the Bootstrap link and the jQuery link, because those are very important. We're going to be using the Bootstrap library and also the jQuery plugin. So first thing first, we go to getbootstrap.com. So we go to getbootstrap.com. If you already know this, you could just skip the video, because we are just going to add the Bootstrap link and the jQuery plugin. So I click on this, or go back to get started. Here, as you can see, we can download or copy the CDN. So I'm just going to copy the CDN, copy it, then go back to our page. After the title, add the CDN. Then the next thing is, I can just copy this jQuery. We might not necessarily use it, but let's just copy to be safe. Then at the bottom of this page, I add the link. So I have the bootstrap.main.css and the bootstrap.main.js. Now the next thing that we need to add, which is very important, is the jQuery plugin, because that is what we're going to be making use of. We're just going to be using this Bootstrap CSS to style our page. So we'll go back, then we go to jQuery. To make things easy, let's go to W3 Schools, because I like getting it from W3 Schools because it's much more easier. Go to W3 Schools, learn Bootstrap, then get started. When you click on this, you just go down to copy the link. Here you can see we have the Max CDN. So I'm just going to copy one. You can either copy this from Max CDN from Google APIs. So I'll just copy one of this, which is jquery.main.js. So I have it, go back, and at the top of this bootstrap.main.js, I'll paste the jQuery plugin. So right now in our page, we have the library for styling, the jQuery plugin, because we're going to use jQuery, and also we have the bootstrap.main.css. Now we've created our index.php. So in the next video, we're going to start adding the navbar and other divs to display the text and links. Hello and welcome back. In this video, we're going to add the navbar to our page so that we'll display the links that can take us to the current.html and the forecast.html pages. So the first thing to do is to add the nav to our page. So we add nav. Then inside the nav, we add different classes and divs with their classes. So the first class we need to add, and all the classes we are adding here, apart from our own custom CSS IDs and classes, they are all from Bootstrap. So the first one is the navbar nav default. So we're using navbar default. So this is the first Bootstrap class we're making use of. Then, so with this now, we know that this element here is going to appear or be displayed as a nav. Then the next thing is we add a div with class container. So this is going to hold every other element in the nav. Now we are using a container, not a container fluid, because we don't want the text to start from the edge. We want it to have some margin both on the right and on the left. So we use this class container. But if you decide to use container fluid, you can use that as well. So after adding this div with class container, the next thing is we had a navbar header. So we say div, and it's going to be navbar header. So this is the navbar header, and inside this we just add an anchor link with our logo and also our image brand. So we add an anchor link, then we add a class. So the class we are adding here is navbar brand. This is Bootstrap. Then also another link, navbar link. Then we add inside. Later we're going to add an image or a logo. Let's just put the tag image. So we're going to have our image tag here, but we're going to do that later. Then the next thing is we add our image brand. That is the title. So we call it weather app, or you can give it whatever name you want. So I'll just call it weather app. So this is what is going to be displayed on the navbar as the navbar brand. Then we have this. The next thing is we add a button. Now what this button is going to do is going to allow our navbar to be responsive. So that when we collapse or we reduce the size of our page, the navbar, the links on the navbar will be able to collapse so that it fits different screen sizes. So the first thing is the button. Now inside the button we add different classes. The first class we're going to add is navbar toggle collapse. So this will allow our links inside our nav to be collapsed whenever we reduce the size of our page. Then the next is data toggle. We are using collapse. Then we add data targets. Here you can just give it any name, and the name we are giving it is going to be the ID you're going to target. So here I could just give it navbar core. Let's just give it navbar core. So this data target is what we're going to target when we add the div with class collapse and navbar collapse as well. Then here inside the button we add a span. Now this span, we see that toggle navigation, and inside this we just add the class of SR only. So this SRO class is just for screen reading purposes, for those that are using screen readers. That's why we are adding this class. Then we're going to add another span with class icon bar. So we're going to add this 3 times. Now the purpose of this is so that when we collapse the our page, is going to show 3 lines. So when we click on it, it's going to display our links inside our nav bar. That is why we are adding this icon bar. This is just a class to show 3 lines. Then we add another here. So we have this. We're going to see this when we collapse our page. The lines that are going to be displayed will be from this icon bar class. So with this, now we've added the button. Now the next thing that we want to do, outside this navbar header, we want to add another div with class collapse. So we'll say collapse navbar collapse. Then we add the ID, because here we already added the data targets. We called it nav column. So the ID is going to be nav call, because that is what we are targeting as we added here. So we just add. Then the next thing we need to do is we add the unordered list, the UL elements. Now for the UL elements, we add the class of navbar, because we want our links to be displayed on the right. Then navbar right. Then here we just say navbar nav. So all this, you can just go to the Bootstrap page, copy it out, and just edit it. But I just want to do this so that you see how everything works. So we have the class of navbar nav, navbar right. So whatever is going to be displayed inside this UL element will be placed on the right of the navbar. So the first thing we want to add is a link to the current page. So we have this. We don't have the current.html yet, so we'll just add current.html. So we say current. Then the next one is the forecast.html. Then we call this forecast. Then the last one we want to add, we just want to add a link to the API we're going to be using. So I'll just put that. I will not put the link right now, but I'll just add open weather map. So from here, if we add the link, from here we can go to the open weather map page to see and get our API. So right now we have the current.html, forecast.html, and this link to take us to open weather map. So we've added all of these links, the navbar. So let's go to our page to see how it looks. If you go down here and you refresh, now we can see that we have this, the weather app as the nav brand, then our different links. Now if we try to reduce the size, minimize this. Now this is what I was talking about. This is from the the icon, this icon bar that we have here. This is being displayed here. So when we start adding other CSS, when we click on this, we'll be able to see what we have inside of this link. So we are having this here because of this class, this class of icon bar. So we have this right now. So we see that the navbar been added with the different links. So in the next video, we add the stars to this link. Welcome back. In the last video, we added the nav bar and we added some links. If we go to our browser, we can see we added this text here, and also we added the links. Right now, these links are not taking us to the respective pages. We're going to add that later. But what we want to do in this video is just to add some styles. We want to change the color of this text and also the background color of this navbar. So the first thing to do is we add a div or an ID here in the navbar. We can call it nav underscore bar. So we add this ID and call it nav underscore bar. But before that, we need to create the CSS files. So I click here and I call it style.css. Now we need to include it in our page. So link, and it's taking us to styles or style.css. Now we have the CSS file inside our index.php. Now the next thing I want to do is to add body CSS. So we add a CSS to the body before we start adding CSS to the different elements. So for the body, we add a font family. I've used this font family before, called Tangerine, then also serif. So this is the font family for the body. That is the default font family. Then the next thing is add a background color. The background color should be white. The background color should be white. Then the font size. Default font size is 20 pixels. So if we want the size to be smaller or larger, we're going to add its own style to that particular element. But by default, the font size of every text is going to be 20 pixels. Then we'll set the margin to 0 and the padding as well to 0. So this is what we have for the body. If we go backward, now we can see that the tests, the font for the tests have changed. Now we want to add the CSS style to the navbar itself. Now the style that we added is peculiar to the whole body of the page, but we want to add CSS style to this particular nav element. And if we go back to our index.php, we called it nav_bar, so which is an ID. Yeah, it's an ID. So we use hash nav_bar. Now what we want to add, we want to make the margin bottom to be 0. So set the margin bottom to be 0 pixels, so that if we add any element below the navbar, if we add any element below this navbar, it's not going to have any margin. There's not going to be any space between this navbar and the element. So set the margin bottom to 0. Then the padding, we just set it to 0. So this is what we're just adding to the nav bar. Then the next thing now we want to do, we can add a background color and set the background color to white. We make the background color of the nav bar to be white. So we go back, we refresh. Now we can see that the background color has changed. Now we want to work on the text. First we work on this. So for this navbar brand that we have here, we can add an ID or a class, whichever one we want. We can add a class and call it weather, also signify the weather name. Then we go here, the style, we say weather. Then we set the color. We want to give it a color of something like blue, so say 4AA1F3, and we'll make it important, so it's going to override its default color. Then the font size, let's say 25 pixels. Font weight, about 600 pixels. Now we have that. We have added this class to this text here. Now we want to do the same for this. We want to add a CSS to this. So we add an ID of nav_list. So we want to add the CSS to this list and element inside the list. So we go here, ID nav_list. Then we get access to the list element, then the child of the list element, which is the anchor element. So in the UL elements here with this ID, we're getting the child, which is the list li element, and also we're getting the child of the li element. So we want to add stars to the child of the li element. So here we just say color. We want to give it the same color as this. So we copy this out and we paste here. Then font width, I'll say about 500. So we've added these styles to these elements and also this. If we go back to it, stars for the body, the navbar, the weather, which is the navbar brand, the text in the navbar brand, and the navbar list. So we go back and we refresh the page. Now we can see that it looks different and it looks better than the way it was. So what we're going to do in the next video is just to add the icon that we have here. So we're going to add the icon in the next video. Hello and welcome back. In the last video, we added the stars to the text we have on our navbar. Right now, what we want to do is we just want to add a logo here beside this text that says weather app. We'll add a logo here. So if you've not downloaded the logo attached to this course, you just download it and add it to your project. You could just create a new folder and you call it images. Then you add the logo.png file in it. Now what we're going to do now in the index.html, we already have an image tag where we need to add our logo. Now inside this source, this src, which stands for source, we just go into our images folder, then add the logo.png. So we say images, then in it we just add the logo.png. So we have this logo.png file. If we go to our browser, we refresh the page, we'll see how it looks. It does not look very nice. So what we need to do is we need to use CSS to place it beside this weather app properly. So we go back. The first thing, we add a CSS class called image responsive. So it's going to allow the image to be responsive based on the width of the browser. Then the next thing, we add an ID and we call the ID logo. Just call it logo. So this is going to be the ID we'll use in adding the style to this image. So we go to our styles.css, then down here we add the CSS properties to this ID. Now the first thing we want to add, we want to give it a maximum height so that it's going to, the height will not exceed that max height. So we say max height, we set it at around 42 pixels. So this is the maximum height it can have, no matter the size of the screen. Then the next thing is we want to add a margin to it. So we say margin right. We add a margin right to it, 8 pixels. Then the next thing is the display. We want the display to be inline. So it's going to be in the same line as this this text that we have here. So the display is going to be inline. Display inline block. So we go down, inline block. That is the display for the image. Then lastly, before we go, if we just go and refresh the page, now we see how it looks. Now here you can see that it has a margin at the bottom. So what we want to do is we want to set the margin height of this. We set it to negative, so it's going to push this up. If we add margin bottom, it's only just going to push this border. If you see this border we have here, it's going to push it down. So what we're going to do is add a margin height, but it's going to be a negative margin height. So it's going to move this image, this logo, and this text. It's going to move it up. And also we'll have to remove this border. So first we just add the margin height or the margin top. So the margin top, we set it to about 15 pixels, so that we want it to be on the same line as this. Now if you can see, now it's on the same line as these links that we have here. If we go back, if we take this out, then go back, now you can see that they are not on the same, they are not aligned. This is a further up than this logo and the text. So we add the margin top. So we have the margin top now. Now they are on the same line. It looks better. Now what we want to do is we want to remove this border. So we're just going to set this border to none. And we're going to do that inside the navbar. Here, this ID we have here, we just set the border to none to remove the border. So if we refresh, now we can see that the border has been removed. Now this looks better than the way it was. Now we have the logo. You can decide to add any logo that you want beside this text here. So what we're going to do next is we're just going to add an image, a div that's going to hold an image here, and on the image we'll have some display some text. We'll do that in the next video. Hello and welcome back. In the last video we added the logo for our weather app here beside the test, the weather app test. Now what we want to do right now in this video is to add an image, a background image here that will be contained inside a div, and in that on the image we're going to display some text. So we'll go into our project. Also, the way we did for our logo, you download the background image and add it to the images folder. The file is called bg.jpg. So right now what we're going to do is, after this nav element down, we're going to add a div of class role. We add a div of class role. Then also we'll add an ID and we'll call it head row. So we'll give it an ID of head row. This class here is from Bootstrap, but this is our own custom ID. Now the next thing is we add a column. So we say div dot call md 12. So we're using the 12th column, so it's going to take the full width of this div of class row. So we add this, then we give it an ID as well. Call it call test. So give it an ID called call test. The next thing we want to do is we first of all add the first test, which is going to be an h2 test or header, and the class is going to be test center. So we want it to be at the center, test center. We can either add this class test center, or when we add the CSS, we'll just add the test align to make the test align to the center. Then also here we add an ID, so call head test 1. It's just a weird name that I gave it. You can give it any ID that you want. So here I'm going to say the most simplest weather app. It's just a test that I came up. It's simple. So this is just a test that I came up with. You can add any test of your own. So we have this now. Then the next thing down below, we're going to add another h2 element, also with class test center. Test center. Then we'll give it an ID of call head test 2. Then we'll just write, so it gets weather information of any city. So we add this test, it says get weather information of any city. Then also we want to add a list element to it, so add ul element. Then the class is going to be list inline. Then we give it our own ID from list item. So every element here will be placed on a row instead of just on a column. So the first one, we call it temperature. Pressure, wind speed, humidity. So these are just some of the data we are going to get from the API. So we're going to know the temperature, the pressure, the wind speed, the humidity. So we have all of this. Now let's go to our browser, refresh, and now we can see we have this, the tests and also the list element. If not for this class here, list inline, the test will appear here as column elements, but here we have all of them here in one row. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to add the CSS that will allow us add the background image. So we go to our style.css. Down here we're going to add head row, which is the ID we give to the element, the div tag. Now the first thing we want to add now is the background image. So we'll say, so we'll call it background URL, and in the background we go to our images folder, then the bg.jpg. So we're adding a background with the URL. This is the part of the background image. Then we set it to no repeats. We set it to no repeats, so the background image will not repeat. Then also the background size should be cover, so it should cover the whole width. So set it to cover. Then the next thing is we still give it a width of 100%. This is going to be the width of the div. Then height, let's set it to about 450 pixels. Then margin top, we'll set the margin top to 0 pixels. So we've added these CSS properties to the div with ID of head row. So all of this will appear inside of this div. And let's go to our browser and refresh the page. Now we can see we have this, we have the background image, we have the test, but we don't have any CSS on the test right now. We're going to add that as well. So but now we can see that we have the background image being displayed. So in the next video, we'll just add the CSS to style this test we have here on the background image. In this video, we are going to add some CSS styles to change this text we have on our image. So we're going to change the color to white and add some padding to this text. Then for the list elements, we're going to move them to the center as well as change the color of the text. So we go into our project, and if we see inside this div, we have different IDs. We have ID of call head test 1, call head test 2, then ID of list underscore item. So we go to our style.css. For this first one, let's add the style. So we go down here. Inside, we add the properties. So the first property we want to add is we want to change the color to white. Then add the padding, and the padding top, we set the padding top to about 30 pixels. Then for the font size, we want it to be big. Let's see how 50 pixels will look. So for the first test, we add the color of white, the padding top, and the font size of 50 pixels. So we go to our browser. Now we see how it looks. Here, it looks much better. The most simplest weather app. It's simple. So we've added the CSS property. Let's do the same for this test and this one as well. So for the other one, which is call head test 2, we add the color as well of white, then add the padding top of say 20 pixels. Then also we add a padding bottom of 30 pixels. So I've added for the second test. Now for the list item here, which is this ID list item, we say lists. We can do it this way: ul hash lists underscore item. So it's going to be the URL element with this ID. You set the color as well to white. The font size of this to 35 pixels, and the text align, if we don't have it already, we set it to center. Let's go back, index.html. Okay, for this we don't have any class of text center, so we added it here. So the text align property is center. All of these elements, list elements, will be displayed at the center. So we go back, we refresh, and now we can see that the text looks different. Maybe we can just increase the text size of, or the font size of this text here. We go back to our page, the CSS. We could make this to be something around, let's say 40, and let's see how it looks. Refresh the page. It still looks a bit smaller. Let's increase it to 45. Yeah, it looks a bit better than the way it was. What we can do is just to change the header tag from H2 to H1. So let's go back, let's change to H1. Go to the CSS, take back the text, the font size to the way it was, 30 pixels. So we go back and refresh, and now we see it's better than the way, and the font size has increased. So you can just style it whichever way you want. Add the font size to this text the way you want it. But for now, I will just leave the font size of this the way it is. So we have this background image. We've started the test, and we've started working on the index.html. So in the next video, we'll start working on the current.html page. That is the page that we have the form whereby we input the city, and it's going to display the result from the Open Weather Map API. So we're going to start working on that in the next video. Hello and welcome. Throughout this section, we're going to build this current.html page. Here in this page, we are going to display the current weather data we are going to retrieve from the Open Weather Map using the Open Weather Map API. Here we have the navbar. We're getting the navbar from the index page. Then we have the links. Then we have this jumbotron. We are also going to style the jumbotron. Here we are also going to include the input field to get the city name, and also the button to perform the search. Here we are not using a form, we are just using the HTML elements, but we're going to add a click event to this button. So if we search for a city by city name and we click on search, this is the result we are going to get. Here, if we send the request, it's going to return the data in JSON format. But what we're going to do is we will just get the particular data that we need from the result and display here inside this div. Then we'll use CSS to style this div. Then we also add the footer. So if we search for another city like Tallinn, we search for Tallinn, then we click on search. It's going to give us the result for Tallinn. Then if we try to submit the button without any data value in the input field, we're going to get this error message saying city field cannot be empty. So this is what we're going to build in this section. So if we go into our HTML from the current, this is the current.html page. We're going to write this from scratch. Then if we go to the weather.js, this is the jQuery code and the Ajax request that we're going to write using the Ajax method. We're going to write all of this from scratch, then retrieve the data and display on the current.html page. So in the next video, we'll start working on adding this current.html page. In this video, we want to start working on the current.html page. Right now, we have the link here on the navbar. If we click on it, now it's going to show us this message that says cannot get current.html. The reason being that we don't have the page yet, but we only have the link. So what we're going to do is we're going to create the current.html page. Go into our project here in the root directory. We create current.html, a new file. We call it current.html. So right now we have the file. If we go back, we refresh, and we click on this link. Now we see that we have the current.html without that error message. So now what we want to do now is we are going to add the code we have inside the index.html to the current.html file. Then we remove the piece of code we don't want. So right now we have it. We're going to leave the navbar because we are using the same navbar. And we take out this div with class row and ID head row that holds the image, background image. So we take it out because we don't want to make use of it. So we go back to the current.html page. Now we can see we are making use of the navbar. So here we don't have the link to take us back to the index page, so we're going to add that. So from here at the top, that is on this link for the weather app, we go back to index.html. So refresh, and from here we can go back to the index.html and back to the current.html page. So what we want to do right now is we want to add a jumbotron. If we go back to our index.html, here we used an image. We added a div with an image. But in the current.html, we're just going to add a jumbotron here. And inside the jumbotron, we just have a text that will be displayed at the center. So we add a jumbotron. And the jumbotron is just a bootstrap class. So we add div class jumbotron. So it's just a bootstrap class that we're going to use to display the text. Then we add our own custom class, call it jumbo. It's our own custom class, so it will allow us to write our own class or CSS. But for now, let's just take it out. Let's just leave it. Maybe we're going to use inline CSS styles. So now what we want to do inside this jumbo, this div with class jumbotron, is to add a test, an h2 test. So we'll say h2. Then we say get current weather information. So this is the test we have. Then I can add inline CSS style. So say style, font size 50 pixels, font weight set it about 600. So we have this. Let's see how it looks. We've added this jumbotron, this div with class jumbotron, and inside we add this h2 tag with the text get current weather information. Then we add an inline CSS styles with font size 50 pixels and font weight 600. So let's go back. Now we can see we have the text inside, but we want this text to be centered, to be placed at the center. So we use the bootstrap class called test center. So say class test center. Now we see the text has been placed at the, or aligned to the center. Now what we are going to do is we're going to add a color to this jumbotron. But before we do that, we need to add an input field here that we take the city, because we are, as I said before, we are going to perform our search based on city name. So we're going to use an input field, not a form. It will just be an input field and a button. Because we are using jQuery, we are going to get the ID of the submit button, then add a click event to the submit button. So we are not basically going to use a form, just an input field. So we're going to add an input field here. So we go, down after this div of class jumbotron, we add another div of class so we add the div of class container. Now inside here we add another div row, and we add an ID, and we'll call the ID city div. That is what I'll call it. So add a div of class row and ID of city div. Then we add a div of column called MD12. So this is just going to hold the text H3 that says enter city name. If you like, you can decide not to add the text. So test center, then test primary. Now this test primary is bootstrap tests or bootstrap class to color the tests. Remember, we have some bootstrap styles or classes: primary, success, info, delete. So for this, it's going to make this test here city, enter city name, to have a color of something like blue, because we're adding this test primary class. So here we can see it, we have city name and it has the color of blue. Now the next thing is add a div of class row and form group, because we want to div row form group. So here we are going to add just the input field. So we add input of type text, name, city, ID, we call it city. Then add a class form control. Then we can add a placeholder if we want, and say enter city name. So this is for the input field. Here we add this ID because we're going to use this ID when we start writing the jQuery code. Then the next one is let's add a submit button or a button. So we say search city. So add an ID of submit city. Then we can give it a class of btn primary. So we've added this button, we've added the input field, then we also add this button. So let's see how it looks. Now we can see we have the input field here and also the search button. So from here the user will just have to type the name of the city and click on this button. As I said earlier, we are going to add a click event on this button. So once we add the click event on this button, it's going to get the results from the values from the API and display to the user down here. So with this, we've added the input field and the button. In the next video, we're just going to add some CSS styles to this, because what we want is we just want the input field to be placed here at the center, and after that we'll start looking at the API from Open Weather Map. In the last video, we added the jumbotron, added these tests, as well as added this input field and button here to this current.html page. Now what we want to do in this video is to add some styles. The first style we'll need to add is to make this button and this input field to be on one line. To do that, we're going to use a bootstrap class called form inline. So we go to our current.html page. So to add that, let's just take this button and place it inside the same div as the input field. So we place inside the same div. Now the next thing that we need to do is we add the class called form inline. It's a bootstrap class that will place the input field and the button on the same line. So we have that now. We go back, refresh. Now we can see that we have the input field and the submit button both on the same line. Now the next thing is to align these fields, this field and this button at the center. So we have this ID. Well, we can either just write the CSS class, so it's going to be on this div, or we could just take out this ID, cut it out from there and place it here. So the CSS is just only going to affect this div with class, row, form group, form inline, and ID city div. So let's do it this way. Let's add the ID to this div that will just affect this input field and button. So to do that now, let's go to our styles.css. Now down here, we're going to add the class city div, or the ID city div. So what we want to do, we give it a width. Let's say something about 60%. Then we want the margin to be auto, so it's going to be placed at the center. Then we align with test align property. We give it a test align property, so to make it align at to the center. So this is just the property we are adding to the div, with width 60%, margin auto, then test align property, we are setting it to center. So it's going to affect this div. We go back. Now we can see that we have the test inputs now at the center. So what we can also do is we can decide to increase the font size of this and reduce the margin here. Then also add a color to this jumbotron. So we go back to the CSS file. First we need to remove that margin, and the margin is to be set at 0. That is the margin bottom. So we add a style here and we'll say margin bottom. We'll set it at 0 pixels. Then the background color. We already have the background color, so we'll just go and copy it out. So if we go back to our styles.css, for on the nav here, we have it. We'll just copy this out. We copy, then go back, set the background color to this, then the color, we'll set it to white. That is for the jumbotron. Let's try and reduce this to 40 pixels, so we'll see how it looks. Now it looks much better than the way it was. So we have this color, and we've removed the margin bottom from this jumbotron. So we have this now. Now what we can do is increase the width or the height of this and the font size of the input field. So to do that, we could just go to the CSS, and down here we could just add input of type text, and let's set the height to, let's see how 40% looks. Then font size 20 pixels. Go back, refresh it, see, we now see the input field, the height of the input field has been increased, and the font size. So now we can see, okay, better. But now we need to also add a height to this submit button. So we go back, we can do the same, or for the submit button, let's make use of this ID. So we say, let's see how 40 pixels. Let's see how it looks. Okay, it looks much more better now. And font weight, set it to bold. Okay, now we have this, the input field and the submit button. We've added the stars. Now in the next video we'll start looking at the APIs, or the API we are going to be making use of, and we'll go through it and see how we can get the required data that we want to make use of.